Hello everyone, I hope you had a great weekend. Today we're going to get back to our story about the American Revolution. But first, today is our Spartan Pride Week, and today is Pajama Day, so I have on my favorite pair of pajamas, and I hope you do too. Who fired the shot heard around the world as their wagon rattled out of Lexington on the morning of April 19th? Samuel Adams and John Hancock could only guess at what was going on back in town. They heard William Diamond's drum beating, and they knew what that meant. A few minutes later, they heard a shot. Then a huge burst of gunfire. A glorious morning. When Samuel Adams heard the explosion of gunfire from Lexington, he had a pretty good idea of what had just happened. "Oh, what a glorious morning this is," he said. John Hancock thought Adams was talking about the weather, which was not bad, but it wasn't glorious. Adams clarified, "I mean, what a glorious day for America and all of the Americans." But what was so glorious about it? Adams must have been thinking that those early morning shots would be the start of a long, hard fight for American independence. Hancock must have been thinking about lunch. He sent a messenger back to Lexington instructing Dorothy and Aunt Lydia to meet him in Woburn, where Adams and Hancock were now headed. He told them to bring the fine salmon that they had planned to eat that day. Wait a minute, the American Revolution just started, and we're talking about salmon? Gathering evidence. We're not exactly sure. British and American witnesses tell different versions of the story. You'll have to listen to some of the evidence and come up with your own conclusions. Just after sunrise on April 19, 1775, Major John Pitcairn led the first group of British troops into Lexington. This guy was itching for a fight. Nice guy, huh? But Pitcairn wasn't supposed to stop in Lexington on the 19th of April. He and his men were out in front of their British soldiers because they were rushing on to Concord. Their mission? Get to Concord as quickly as possible and take control of the bridges in town. Remember, the British were already hours behind schedule, so Pitcairn was hoping to march right through Lexington. Then he saw the Lexington Minutemen line up on the town common. There were about 70 of them, ranging in age from 16 to 75. There were 8 father and son combinations. There was at least one African American, a 34-year-old man named. When Captain John Parker saw the British approaching, he told his nervous Minutemen, "Let the troops pass and do not fire upon them unless being fired upon first." The Minutemen really weren't there to fight anyway. They mostly wanted to send the British a message. "We're here, we have guns, we don't appreciate your visit." Pitcairn and his soldiers marched right up to the Minutemen. No one knew what was about to happen. The first shot. One interesting thing about this moment is that both commanders told their men not to fire. Pitcairn gave very clear orders to his British soldiers. "I instantly called to the soldiers not to fire, but to surround and disarm them." John Parker gave similar orders to his Minutemen. "I immediately ordered our troops to disperse and not to fire." So while the British tried to surround the Minutemen started slowly walking off in different directions. It was a confusing scene. The key point was this: the Minutemen did not drop their guns. This angered the excitable Major. So no one takes credit for the first shot heard around the world. The first shot of the American Revolution. It might have been a Minuteman, or it might have been a British soldier. It might even have come from one of those houses in town. What we do know is that when the British soldiers heard the shot, they lost control. They started charging, screaming, and firing their guns. "Our men, without any orders, rushed in upon them, fired, and put them to the fight," said Lieutenant Baker. The men were so wild, they could hear no orders. Some of the Minutemen stood and fired back. Others ran for their lives, blasting away as they retreated through town. Breakfast time. Down in town, British soldiers started looking for weapons. That was the whole idea of the mission, as Gage's secret orders to Colonel Smith explained. "You will seize and destroy all the artillery, ammunition, provisions, tents, small arms, and all military stores. but you will take care that the soldiers do not plunder the inhabitants or hurt their property. Unfortunately for Gage, the people of Concord had been expecting something like this for days. By now, nearly all the military supplies were hidden in attics or buried in fields. At the Wood family home, for example, a pile of guns had been hastily shoved into a bedroom. When the British came to search the house, the Wood woman welcomed the soldiers. They told the men that they could search anywhere they wished, except for one small bedroom where a sick woman was sleeping. The British officers considered themselves gentlemen, and they would never disturb a sick woman. So they ordered their men to leave the room alone. Needless to say, no weapons were found in the Wood house that day. All the while, the soldiers kept up their search for supplies. They found a few barrels of flour with some musket balls. They tossed it into a pond. A few days later, the people fished everything out. Most of the flour was still good. They found a few cannons, and they destroyed them. They smashed up the wooden carriages that were used to haul the cannons around. Then they set the broken wood on fire. Bridge fight. Earlier that morning, Hannah Davis had watched the Minutemen gather outside her house. Her husband, Isaiah, was the captain. She later said, "My husband said but little that morning. As he led the company from the house, he turned himself around and seemed to have something to say. He only said, 'Take care of the children,' and was soon out of sight." Now, up in the hills, Isaiah Davis and the other Minutemen saw smoke rising from the middle of Concord. They were too far away to see what the smoke was. "Will you let them burn the town down?" shouted one Minuteman. "No, no," the others roared. Captain Davis led the Minutemen down toward the North Bridge. "We were all ordered to load," said another Minuteman, "and had strict orders not to fire till we were fired upon first, then to fire as fast as we could." At the North Bridge, a British officer named Walter Lorry looked up and saw 400 angry Americans marching toward him. Lorry didn't have much time for a plan. A few British soldiers ran onto the bridge and started trying to rip up the wooden planks. The Americans called out for the British to stop messing with their bridge. Then the shooting started. As usual, no one knows who fired first. "We soon drove them from the bridge," reported Mr. Barrett. Several Minutemen and British soldiers were killed or wounded. Isaiah Davis was one of them who died at the Old North Bridge that day. What's next? You won't be surprised to learn that British and American soldiers told very different versions of the amazing events of April 19, 1775. According to General Thomas Gage, British soldiers had marched out to Concord on a simple, peaceful errand. Then, for no reason, they were viciously attacked by sneaky rebels. A number of armed persons, he reported, to the amount of many thousands assembled on the 19th of April last, and from behind walls and lurking holes attacked the British troops. According to the Americans, a pack of bloodthirsty British soldiers had invaded the quiet towns of Lexington and Concord. Then, for no reason, the soldiers started shooting people. Express riders like Paul Revere raced from town to town with letters saying, "The barbarous murderers committed on our innocent brethren on Wednesday the 19th have made it absolutely necessary that we immediately rise and take up arms to defend our wives and children from the butchering hands of the inhumane soldiers of the British Empire." Militiamen all over New England responded to the call by grabbing their guns and marching toward Boston. By the end of April, nearly 20,000 of them had gathered. They had the British Army trapped in Boston. They had no idea what to do next. King George knew what to do next, though. He was outraged that the colonists had dared to fight the British soldiers, and he was more convinced than ever that the British military would soon bring the Americans to their knees. He said, "When once these rebels have felt a smart blow, they will submit." Okay, George, we'll test your theory. Alright guys, so that is the end of our day 4 of the American Revolution. We will continue our story tomorrow. Everybody have a great day.